This is the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, a monumental feat of engineering and ambition that is reshaping the future of Ethiopia and the African continent. Once completed, it will be the largest hydroelectric power plant not just in Ethiopia, but in all of Africa. Its impact reaches far beyond energy production. It has sparked dreams of economic revival in Ethiopia and stirred controversy, fear, and geopolitical tension across the region. Imagine a dam so massive it can generate enough electricity to light up millions of homes, run countless factories, and power entire cities. A structure that controls nearly 20 trillion gallons of water, enough to meet the water needs of all Ethiopia. The vision is grand, and many celebrate it as a historic milestone for a country striving to lift itself out of poverty. But behind this vision lies a growing storm. The dam is being built on the Blue Nile, a key tributary of the Nile River, a river that has sustained civilizations for thousands of years. Egypt and Sudan, both of which rely heavily on the Nile's waters, are growing increasingly alarmed as the dam nears completion. Their concern isn't just political, it's existential. So, what exactly is the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam? And why has it triggered such an intense international dispute? Initially shrouded in secrecy and codenamed Project X, the dam was later renamed the Millennium Dam. It eventually adopted its current name, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, to symbolize a rebirth of national pride and progress. And its scale certainly matches its ambition. Built using entirely local resources and materials, the structure consists of an astonishing 367 million cubic feet of roller-compacted concrete, stretching about 1.1 miles, or roughly the length of 17 football fields. The dam sits over 4,000 feet above sea level. Behind it lies a massive reservoir covering 723 square miles, an area larger than the entire city of Houston. This reservoir can hold a staggering 19.6 trillion gallons of water. Of this, around 15 trillion gallons are usable for power generation, while the remaining 4 trillion serve as a buffer, a so-called dead volume, used for emergencies. The dam's engineers designed it with 3 advanced spillways, together capable of releasing up to 8 million gallons of water per second. These include a primary spillway with 6 massive gates, an auxiliary spillway for sudden surges, and an emergency spillway for extreme flood events expected once every 1,000 years. At the heart of the dam's energy production are 13 powerful Francis turbines, split between power stations on either side of the dam. These turbines will collectively produce 5,150 megawatts of electricity, translating into over 16,000 gigawatt hours annually. That's enough energy to power not just Ethiopian cities, but also export surplus electricity to neighboring countries. The infrastructure to distribute this energy is already in place, connecting the dam to the national grid and beyond. In terms of engineering, it's a marvel, but its implications go far beyond technical achievement. The conflict arises from history, specifically, water rights agreements dating back to colonial times. Under 1959 treaty, Egypt secured rights to 14.6 trillion gallons of Nile water annually. Today, over 90% of Egypt's population depends on the Nile for drinking water, agriculture, and industry. But here's the twist. Roughly 85% of the Nile's flow originates not in Egypt or Sudan, but in the Ethiopian highlands, through the very tributary where the dam is now being built. In fact, Egypt receives around 57% of its water supply from the Blue Nile. So when Ethiopia began filling the dam's massive reservoir, Egypt sounded the alarm. Why? Because that reservoir will eventually hold nearly an entire year's worth of Nile water. And every gallon stored upstream means less flowing downstream. Egypt is already suffering from severe water scarcity. It consumes about 21 trillion gallons of water annually, yet its total water resources amount to only 16 trillion. It bridges this gap through costly imports and by recycling wastewater. Further reductions in Nile flow would push the country closer to disaster, causing agricultural collapse, job losses, and even destabilization. In a worst-case scenario, Egypt could lose over 1 million jobs and $1.8 billion in GDP each year. The only way to minimize the damage would be for Ethiopia to fill the reservoir slowly, over a span of 12 to 20 years. But if Ethiopia were to complete the filling in just 6 years, Egypt could lose up to 18% of its water supply, an unbearable hit to a country that already imports the majority of its food and is teetering on the edge of a water crisis. For Egyptians, this isn't just a development project happening abroad. It's a direct threat to their survival. Ethiopia, however, sees things differently. For decades, it has endured widespread electricity shortages, with around 65% of population lacking access to the grid. In rural areas, where most Ethiopians live, that number jumps to 80%. Many families rely on wood or coal for cooking and heating, leading to serious indoor pollution and respiratory problems. The Renaissance Dam offers a path forward, a chance to electrify the country, reduce dependence on firewood, and lower health risks. And there's more. The dam is expected to turn Ethiopia into Africa's leading electricity exporter. With estimated annual earnings of $1 billion, the country could finally invest in education, healthcare, and infrastructure. Beyond energy, the reservoir will support economic activities like fishing and tourism. Up to 7,000 tons of fish could be harvested annually, creating jobs and food sources. The reservoir also represents a step toward solving another major problem: access to clean drinking water. Today, over 62 million Ethiopians live without safe water. Roughly 7.5% of the global water crisis is concentrated in Ethiopia. Sanitation is dire. Over 97 million people lack access to indoor toilets. In many villages, waste flows into the same rivers and ponds that people use for drinking and cooking. As a result, millions suffer from waterborne diseases, and child mortality is high. In this context, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam is more than just an energy project. It's a symbol of hope, a lifeline. Despite its critical importance to Ethiopia, the dam was initially built in secret. Egypt and Sudan weren't even informed when construction began. In 2010, 6 upstream Nile countries, Ethiopia, Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, and Tanzania, signed a cooperative agreement calling for a fair distribution of Nile water. Egypt and Sudan refused to sign, fearing that it would undermine their historical claims. This isn't the first time water politics have caused trouble. Around the world, upstream countries tend to hold the advantage. The Hoover Dam on the Colorado River limited Mexico's water access. The Ataturk Dam in Turkey reduced flows to Syria and Iraq. And China's upstream control of rivers has raised tensions with countries like India, Pakistan, and Vietnam. Recognizing the danger of escalating conflict, Egypt, Sudan, and Ethiopia signed the Declaration of Principles in 2015. The agreement promoted cooperation and set mechanisms for dispute resolution and damage compensation. However, it failed to mention Egypt's traditional water rights, a glaring omission that Ethiopia took as tacit approval to move forward. As construction progressed, talks repeatedly broke down. Egypt accused Ethiopia of acting unilaterally, while Ethiopia accused Egypt of trying to control the project. Sudan, caught in the middle, has tried to mediate, with limited success. Even the United States attempted to facilitate negotiations, but Ethiopia eventually walked out, accusing Washington of bias toward Egypt. The Ethiopian government insists that it has no intention of harming its neighbors. It argues that the reservoir will fill naturally during the rainy season, and that it's physically impossible to stop the process once water begins accumulating. The dam has 2 openings through which water continues flowing downstream, but they can't match the massive volume entering the reservoir during peak rainfall. And that's the crux of the issue. Ethiopia believes it has every right to harness its natural resources to improve the lives of its people. Egypt fears that its very survival depends on halting or controlling that process. The dam has already begun producing electricity, and its reservoir continues to grow. Meanwhile, tensions remain high, with no long-term agreement in place. The Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam is one of the most ambitious infrastructure projects in modern African history. It embodies the promise of progress for Ethiopia and the peril of water scarcity for Egypt. In a region where water is more precious than oil, the stakes couldn't be higher. This is more than a dam. It's a flashpoint, a test of diplomacy, cooperation, and the balance between national interest and regional survival. The future of the Nile depends on whether these nations can shift from confrontation to collaboration, and whether the waters that once united them can continue to sustain them all. Egypt is known as a desert nation, and rightfully so. About 96% of its land is barren, covered by vast stretches of sand and rocky terrain. Only around 3% of the country's total land area is suitable for agriculture. And yet, farming remains a major part of Egypt's identity and economy. Crop cultivation contributes nearly 1/8 of the national GDP and employs around 1/4 of the population. For a country with so little arable land, that's a striking achievement. But with Egypt's population steadily growing, so does the demand for food, farmland, and agricultural innovation. This challenge has led to one of the country's most ambitious goals, greening the desert. It's a bold idea, but not a fantasy. Egyptians have discovered that by repurposing agricultural waste, they can breathe life into dead land. transforming dry, infertile sand into lush, productive fields. But how exactly is that possible? To understand the scale of the challenge, look at a map of Egypt. Apart from the Nile and a few fertile zones, the rest is desert. Yet despite the harsh conditions, the country has seen agricultural success stories. In 2022, Egypt harvested 9.3 million tons of wheat, more than either Italy or Spain, countries with far more favorable farming environments. Between 2019 and 2023, annual corn production averaged nearly 7 million tons. Rice is another staple, with 3.7 million tons harvested on average each year during that period. These numbers reflect a deep national effort, but they also produce a byproduct, agricultural waste. And in Egypt, waste management is a serious problem. In cities like Cairo, for example, more than 15,000 tons of solid waste are produced each day. While affluent neighborhoods may see 90% of that trash collected, poorer areas are often neglected. In slums, waste simply piles up on the streets, uncollected and unmanaged. Add agricultural waste to that equation, and you have a recipe for environmental degradation. In 2017 alone, Egypt's farms and livestock operations generated over 33 million tons of agricultural waste. But unlike household trash, this waste has potential. It can be used to generate heat and electricity, especially at sugar processing plants. Some of it is turned into biogas, a renewable energy source that can power stoves or farm machinery. In fact, as of 2025, Egypt had installed nearly 2,000 biogas units, producing 74 million cubic feet of gas annually, the equivalent of 86,000 standard butane cylinders. These same units also produce about 50,000 tons of organic fertilizer each year. Startups are contributing too. One local initiative collected 129,000 units of agricultural waste and developed a fertilizer specifically designed for Egyptian crops. Rice husks, which are typically discarded, are now repurposed for energy during milling and even used as animal feed. However, the bigger picture remains troubling. A recent study showed that more than half, about 52%, of all agricultural waste in Egypt is never reused. Instead, it's either burned in inefficient burners, polluting the air, or dumped in ravines and canals, threatening both the environment and public health. Another field study, conducted across 143 villages, found similar results. Some waste is composted, and some is fed to livestock, but much of it ends up tossed beside irrigation canals or left to rot in open ditches. The problem isn't a lack of potential, it's a lack of systems to convert that potential into sustainable solutions. Enter Seacom, a pioneering organization that's taken the lead in using agricultural waste to green the desert. Their approach isn't based on fantasy. It's rooted in science and sustainability. Their method begins with composting, right at the source. Instead of transporting waste to centralized facilities, Seacom processes it locally. Agricultural byproducts like wheat straw, corn stalks, and rice husks are combined with cow manure to create compost. The process takes about 3 months, but the end result is transformative. For example, to cultivate their first 155 acres of farmland, Seacom used over 4,500 tons of compost. Around 70 tons are typically applied per 2.5 acres. The compost doesn't just enrich the soil with nutrients like nitrogen, phosphate, and potassium. It also fosters microbial life that enhances water retention and nutrient absorption. The result? Fertile, living topsoil in what was once lifeless desert. But compost alone isn't enough. Seacom follows strict crop rotation practices. Nitrogen-depleting crops are alternated with nitrogen-fixing ones like legumes. This keeps the soil healthy and productive year after year. Poor crop planting is a major cause of desertification in other regions, and Seacom is determined to avoid those mistakes. Water, of course, is essential. Egypt's climate doesn't allow for wasteful irrigation. Seacom sources its water from 3 places: the Nile, municipal supplies, and treated wastewater. That last source is particularly important. On Seacom's farms, wastewater is treated using a combination of 84 types of bacteria, including yeast, lactobacilli, and photosynthetic microbes. This treatment not only reduces odors, but also cuts sludge by as much as 50%. The resulting water is reused for crop irrigation. To maximize efficiency, Seacom uses center pivot irrigation systems, which distribute water in circular patterns around a central point. From satellite images, you can spot these green circles surrounded by desert, visual proof that something remarkable is happening. In 2019, Seacom scaled up its greening efforts, combining composted soil with circular irrigation systems. By the end of 2024, they had established 5 farms, totaling 1,790 acres of reclaimed desert land. And the results are impressive. Fields that were once barren now grow crops like cotton, peanuts, jojoba, dates, mint, basil, lemongrass, and hibiscus. Even chamomile, a surprising choice for a desert crop, was planted across 200 acres in late 2021, watered by 4 circular irrigation systems. Perhaps most notably, Seacom used wheat waste to grow wheat. Given Egypt's heavy dependence on wheat imports, growing this staple crop locally is a strategic win. In 2023, the project yielded 3.6 tons of wheat from just 2.5 acres of reclaimed desert. That success has prompted plans for expansion, but the impact of greening the desert goes beyond crops. As plant life returns, biodiversity follows. On Seacom farms, frogs, insects, foxes, hedgehogs, lizards, birds, and even reptiles have reappeared. The once empty land is becoming an ecosystem again. With fertile ground available, livestock farming is also possible. Seacom now raises cattle that graze freely, protected only by simple roofs to shield them from the sun. Their diet is entirely sustainable, consisting of crop byproducts like corn, clover, cotton seeds, and wheat bran. Each cow produces around 6 gallons of milk per day. Sheep are also thriving, with the project producing over a ton of wool in 2011 alone. The farms also serve as testing grounds for eco-friendly agricultural innovations. One such innovation involves the neem tree, known for its natural pesticide properties. Neem oil extracted from the tree's fruits and seeds is now used to protect crops, eliminating the need for synthetic chemicals that could harm soil, air, and water quality. And let's not forget solar power. Egypt's abundant sunlight makes it ideal for solar energy. Seacom has equipped its irrigation systems with solar panels, which power both the pumps and the sprinklers. This supports the project's zero emissions goal, proving that even energy-intensive processes like irrigation can be made sustainable. Still, one element might be missing from this desert transformation: trees. Fortunately, Egypt is already working on that. Since 1998, projects like the Serapeum Forest have used treated wastewater and drip irrigation to grow forests on desert land. Today, Egypt has more than 20 such plantations, and Seacom is contributing as well. One of its newest initiatives, called Farm for Climate, aims to plant 400,000 new trees. In 2016, the project even purchased an 11-mile stretch of desert near Minya to create a new farm. At first, conditions were brutal. Frequent sandstorms made planting difficult. But the team decided to begin with trees, specifically casuarina, which were planted in rows without needing fully fertile soil. Trees offer both protection and long-term sustainability, helping stabilize the land for future farming. What Seacom has achieved is nothing short of remarkable. It's not just about growing food in the desert. It's about restoring life, building ecosystems, and creating a replicable model of sustainable development. For countries facing similar environmental challenges, Egypt is no longer just a land of ancient wonders. It's becoming a blueprint for the future of desert farming. When you think of deserts, you probably don't think of fish. And yet, Egypt, a nation where much of the landscape is dry, sandy, and sun-scorched, produces more fish than any other country in Africa. In 2023 alone, Egypt harvested an impressive 2 million tons of fish, with both a Mediterranean and Red Sea coastline. That might not sound surprising, but here's the twist. About 80% of that fish doesn't come from the sea. It comes from the desert. Yes, the same desert known for its barren dunes and scorching temperatures is now home to millions of fish. So how exactly did Egypt manage to pull this off? Let's start at the beginning. On the shores of the Mediterranean, Egypt's Mediterranean coastline stretches around 650 miles, and for decades, it was a major fishing zone. Between 1920 and 2019, nearly 3.8 million tons of fish were pulled from Egypt's Mediterranean waters. Sardines, once a major part of the national catch, dropped from 30% of the total haul in 1950 to under 4% by 1968. Why? Overfishing. And then came another major disruption. The Aswan High Dam, completed in the 1960s. While it brought electricity and helped control floods, it also blocked nutrient-rich silt from flowing into the Mediterranean. These nutrients were essential for sustaining marine ecosystems. Ironically, in the 1980s, fish populations made a brief comeback thanks to agricultural runoff. Fertilizers flowing into the Nile created nutrient-rich waters that helped fish stocks rebound. But the boost was temporary. By the 2000s, catches began falling again. Between 2011 and 2019, they plunged nearly 50%. Research showed a troubling pattern. Every time an area's fish stocks ran low, fishermen moved on to another spot. This cycle eventually reached a dead end. With international waters off limits and Egypt's own coastal fisheries depleted, the Mediterranean could no longer provide what the country needed. To the east, Egypt also has access to the Red Sea, with another 620 miles of coastline. But the outlook there is just as bleak. Scientists studying 55 commercial fish species in the Red Sea found that 91% were overfished. And with other coastal nations controlling their own waters, Egyptian boats couldn't expand outward. Geography, politics, and environmental limits had all closed in. Even worse, open sea fishing is unpredictable. Fish migration patterns shift with ocean currents and temperature changes. That level of uncertainty doesn't work for a country like Egypt, where food security is a national priority. Faced with failing sea fisheries and a growing population, Egypt looked for alternatives. And that's when the desert came into focus. As odd as it sounds, fish farming in Egypt's desert started way back in the 1930s. Early experiments introduced carp into artificial ponds on research farms. The effort was small, but it planted a seed. In 1961, Egypt took a major step forward, building a 296-acre fish farm in the Eastern Sahara. Over the next 2 decades, the government invested heavily in aquaculture. By the mid-1980s, Egypt had 4 large hatcheries, 6 farms, and 5 fry collection stations. Annual output had nearly tripled, reaching 45,000 tons. But things didn't stop there. The real transformation came decades later, with massive projects like Al Fus and Birkut Galleon. Near Port Said in the Nile Delta lies Al Fus, one of the world's largest desert-based fish farming complexes. From space, the site is hard to miss. Nearly 6,000 fish ponds carved into the sandy earth. Among them are over 300 freshwater ponds, fed by reverse osmosis systems that convert salty desert water into fresh water. The on-site plant produces around 198,000 gallons of fresh water every day to support these operations. But Al Fus is more than just a cluster of ponds. It's a self-sustaining aquaculture ecosystem, complete with a sorting and packaging plant handling 8 tons of fish daily, an ice factory producing 40 tons of ice per day, a feed mill that produces 6,000 tons of fish food annually, recreational lakes spanning over 6,000 acres. It's even a hub for scientific research. In-house laboratories work on breeding red tilapia, a salt-tolerant version of the freshwater favorite. Once perfected, this innovation could eliminate the need to convert salt water at all, saving time, energy, and water. When the farm first launched in 2021, it produced 460 tons of fish. Today, it's producing over 5,000 tons, with targets set at 12,000 tons by 2026. To the west of the Nile Delta, another massive facility, Birkut Galleon, has taken root, covering 3,950 acres. It contains over 1,300 fish ponds and its own incubator for 20 million marine fish fry. The industrial area spans 55 acres and includes a fish processing plant with a 100-ton daily capacity, a feed factory that can produce 180,000 tons per year, an ice production facility for cold storage needs. Launched in 2017, Birkut Galleon produced 13,800 tons of fish annually in its first phase, and production has continued to grow. Here's the part that surprises most people. Even with these massive state-run facilities, the majority of Egypt's fish still comes from small farmers. Roughly 86% of Egypt's total fish production is the result of private individuals and families operating small fish farms throughout the country. Many of these farms are clustered along the Nile, where conditions are more favorable. Others are scattered across the desert, using portable pools, repurposed materials, or even greenhouse aquaculture systems to raise tilapia. In some of these setups, advanced methods like smart greenhouse aquaponics are used to conserve water and improve efficiency. This is critical in a country where water is more precious than gold. Egypt is one of the most water-scarce nations on Earth. Over 97% of its water comes from the Nile, and even that isn't enough. The country faces an annual water deficit of 1.8 trillion gallons. Each citizen gets about 148,000 gallons per year, which is far below the global water poverty line of 264,000 gallons. Yet fish farming is water-intensive. So how does Egypt make it work? The answer lies in recycling. Water used in fish ponds, though filled with organic waste, can be redirected to irrigate crops. The plants absorb nutrients from the waste, cleaning the water in the process. That water can then be sent back to the fish ponds, creating a closed-loop system. Across Egypt, farmers have built networks of canals linking their fish ponds to nearby fields. The result is more food, using less water. Despite its success, Egypt's aquaculture industry faces hurdles. One unexpected issue comes from the very top: government competition. When Egypt launched state-run megaprojects in 2015, it also slashed the budget of the General Authority for Fish Resources Development, the agency supporting small-scale farmers, from $8 million to just $2.5 million. Many small farmers now say they feel neglected or even threatened by the government's growing dominance in the market. Still, Egypt's desert fish farms are not just about solving hunger. They're also about building resilience and even profit. Projects like Alphus and Birkut Galleon are attracting global attention, and Egypt could one day export these technologies to other arid nations facing similar challenges.